Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 75. Soldier. In the end, the only thing that got Soldier where his new handlers wanted him to go was the fact that Steve let Soldier hide behind him. Soldier didn't understand why he was suddenly so scared of, well, honestly, damn near everything. But it was. If they'd expected him to just march to wherever, he didn't think he'd have made it. Fear of being punished for failure, be screwed. The little moving wire cage had been mostly okay. Soldier knew it would have taken him all of about 10 seconds to get out of the thing if he'd really wanted to. The trip to wherever they went, Asgard, whenever that was, on the other hand, definitely not. The only good thing about that trip was he knew he was so far beyond the reach of his old controllers as to be laughable. The further away from them he got, the better he liked it. Moving through the city they'd transported to had been unexpectedly nerve-wracking. Soldier had alternated between seeing people as threats to be eliminated and as people to run the hell away from as fast as he could manage. Mostly because roughly 3/4 of Asgard's population were visibly armed. Soldier spotted so many knives, daggers, swords, spears, and other medieval weaponry it boggled the mind. Weirdly, he did not spot a single gun. Only Steve's presence, his grip on Soldier's flesh arm, and the quiet words of encouragement and reassurance especially, kept Soldier from running or going on the warpath. Part of Soldier was deeply grateful that Steve and the other Avengers were more tolerant controllers. He'd have gotten punished a good 10 or 15 times since his capture otherwise, and just the thought of the punishments he'd earned at the hands of his other controllers made him shudder. They were led to an enormous building which, despite appearance, could not be made of gold. Because Soldier may not have known much, but even he knew that gold was not strong enough for construction of any kind. Given how unmarked the building was when they got close to it, it wasn't even built of other materials and coated in gold, because gold just did not stand up to wear and tear well at all. Which was a weird thing for Soldier to know, but he'd about given up on ever figuring out how he knew this stuff. They were led through a bunch of hallways and then into a room that sort of made his eyes bug out. There were 2 enormous beds with cloth all around the sides and over the top, one on each side of the room. Each bed was flanked by furniture Soldier didn't know the name for. Between them was a sunken area that held a fire pit, of all things, and a bunch of cushy seating. The far wall was almost all windows, each contained in an arch, and there was a balcony beyond the windows. It wasn't that until he got smacked in the face by a breeze that Soldier realized the windows were not actually windows. That they were... well, he didn't know the word for it, but they were open to the outside with neither glass nor door to shield them from foul weather. From there, they were led to another room. This one was even more baffling than the bedroom. Soldier had no idea what the room was for at first. It didn't look anything like a recalibration room. There was no chair anywhere in sight. Nor did it look like any infirmary, hospital, or other medical facility Soldier had ever been in. Wait, how did he know what those things looked like? As far as Soldier knew, he'd never been in any of them. Even the Avengers had kept him in the blank room that he'd been put in when they patched him up. He could kind of remember his previous handlers repairing damage, or patching him up when he got banged up during a mission, which he had the vague sense that hadn't happened often. Made sense, sort of, since he evidently shot people from a distance a lot. Not much reason to get banged up doing that. He added the question of how he knew what various medical facilities looked like on the inside to the growing list of "how do I know this?" questions in his head. The longer he went without being recalibrated, the longer that list got. It was getting very annoying because no answers were forthcoming. They'd barely got into the room when a tiny, ancient-looking, white-haired woman walked up to them. "Greetings. I am Healer Ear, the head healer of Asgard," she said. "Steve Rogers," Steve said, offering a hand to shake. "And this is... well, we're calling him Soldier for now." Air looked him up and down, then spoke directly to him. "Her Majesty has informed me that there is need to remove the metal arm you wear and replace it with another, as well as remove several items that have been attached to your spine." Soldier just stared at her. "He doesn't talk," Steve said. He said one word in the last... Steve looked briefly stunned. Has it really only been 3 days? Sheesh. Feels like it's been longer than that. If you will sit here. Air indicated a flat something or other that was several feet off the floor. So that we can scan you and calibrate our systems to your biological rhythms. Soldier gave that flat thing a wild-eyed look. Maybe you can scan me first, so he knows it won't hurt him? Steve offered. Air eyed them both, then nodded. Very well. So Steve sat down and got himself scanned, and Soldier tried very hard not to feel grateful for Steve's tolerance. It didn't work too well. After he got scanned, Air spoke up. I think it would perhaps be best for the two of you to wander about. It will give him less time to fret about things. Also, I will accompany you so that he may get used to my presence. I doubt he will come to trust me, but tolerance is better than nothing. So they spent the day wandering around the palace and the grounds around it. Soldier found himself cataloging the place's defenses and weak spots. There were surprisingly few of the latter, despite the place's apparent showiness. Soldier wondered if the showiness wasn't one of its defenses. Most people would take one look at a building glittering with that much gold-colored metal and peg it as a poorly built from a security perspective. Soldier discovered that even the open window-like spaces were not anywhere near as undefended as they appeared. Apparently, some weird energy screen similar to what Loki used to contain him kept both foul weather and would-be attackers out. Apparently, the screams were smart enough to know the difference between a pleasant breeze in summer and a bitter cold wind in winter. A little after lunch the next day, the three of them headed back to the Asgardian version of an infirmary. Soldier didn't have much time to get spooked or anything worse than that. He'd barely sat his butt down on the flat thing, it wasn't a bed, so he didn't know what to call it, before he blacked out. Soldier didn't so much wake up as reboot. For long moments after awareness returned, there was nothing. Just the autonomous body functions that forced his heart to beat and his lungs to breathe. If slowly and irregularly, triggered only by his body running low on oxygen. Though he didn't know it, this state was virtually identical to his state every time he was brought out of cryo-freeze. After 7 decades of that, his body had forgotten how to wake up normally. It didn't really help that despite almost a week without recalibration, Soldier hadn't consciously remembered much. Oh, he remembered things. But it had all been subconscious, triggered by Steve's presence or the presence of things he was very familiar with. Soldier hadn't once managed to actively pull a memory out of his badly scrambled brain. Even Steve's version of the serum would have struggled to fix a brain repeatedly fried by drugs and electricity. Soldier's version had tried over the last 70 years, but his being frozen stopped all healing and additional damage had done repeatedly whenever he was awake, so the bastardized serum had been fighting a losing battle. Now, though, Soldier had gone a week without being recalibrated, and for the first time in 70 years, he had actually been allowed to sleep, as opposed to being put in suspended animation. The serum took advantage of the situation and shut Soldier down in order to heal as much of the accumulated damage as it could in one sitting. Still, for a minute or two, Soldier was deader, blanker-eyed than he'd been at any point in the Avengers' custody. But then, slowly, haltingly, things started booting back up, one by one. Conscious control of his breathing came first, and his breathing rate picked up and steadied. Gross muscle control came next, with a series of spastic twitches from various parts of his body before he went still. Fine muscle control came right on the heels of that, though that was a lot less noticeable, with only the fingers of his flesh hand twitching and moving for a moment before going still. Then the mental gears started turning over. The first thing Soldier became truly aware of was a stunning lack of pain radiating from his left shoulder and upper rib cage. The pain had been so much a part of his existence that he'd stopped noticing it somewhere along the way. The sudden lack of it was startling. Then memories started trickling in. Oh, not all of them, to be sure. Not even half of them. And what he got, he did not get in any sort of order. But everything he got did have a central theme. Steve. A bunch of jumbled memories of a skinny, short Steve. A handful of memories with Steve bigger and stronger, with no attendant memory of how he got that way or how Soldier knew the two were the same guy. A single memory from what had to be very early on after his capture by Those people being told Steve was dead, refusing to believe it, and a vague, fuzzy sort of memory that told him he'd paid for that with a lot of pain. Nothing else. Nothing about who he was, whether he'd had a family or other friends. Next to nothing about the time post-Big Steve, save for stuff in the background of the handful of memories that indicated something to do with the military. Only a few hazy sort of memories of his time as a captive. Just enough to tell him it hadn't been a fun time. Well, which was kind of a no-brainer. Despite how little there was, it was more than he'd had before. At least now he knew why he'd been so interested in Steve, so willing to trust him, so reluctant to complete the mission he'd been given. As fast as a switch being flipped, Soldier's entire world altered. Nothing in the last few days had made any sense, but now it was starting to. Soldier hadn't had a mission. After 70 years of missions, he simply didn't know how to operate without them, even though he was beginning to understand that there had been a time when he hadn't worked that way. A few things had become rather clear in the last few minutes. His captors wanted the Avengers, wanted Steve dead. Soldier was not willing to put it past them to have sent him to achieve that goal on purpose. The chances they didn't know Soldier had once been Steve's friend and protector had to be in the negative digits somewhere. Sending Captain America's best friend to kill him would have appealed to their twisted sense of so-called humor. Worse, it had come way too close for Soldier's comfort before he'd been stopped. Soldier still didn't know much, but he knew now who Steve was and why he was so important. And there was no way he'd ever let those assholes kill Steve. Or worse, get their hands on him. Soldier would burn the world down before he'd let them do to Steve what they'd done to him. And that was without Soldier really remembering much of what they'd done to him at the moment. Soldier didn't know how to function without a mission. Well, now he had one. Keep Steve alive at all costs. Steve didn't know it yet, but he'd just gotten himself a very dedicated, utterly lethal, and merciless watchdog. Problem. Soldier had no idea where he was right now, or where Steve was. That couldn't be allowed. Soldier's eyes popped open, squinting briefly against the bright lights. Before anyone had a chance to do more than look his way, he sat up in one smooth liquid motion, checking the entire room for threats and exits. He was in the room they'd first been led to, the one with 2 beds and the fire pit. He was shirtless, but thankfully not naked, as he was still wearing the tack pants he'd arrived at the tower in. Steve was propped up in a chair right beside the bed Soldier had been put in, sound asleep and snoring like a bandsaw, thanks to the uncomfortable position he was in. Soldier took a few seconds to check out the new arm. It was a lot lighter than the old one, which was probably why he'd stopped hurting. His body was no longer having to throw itself out of alignment to support the extra weight. Its design was simplified, at least on the outside, but Soldier actually approved of that. Fewer weak spots for weapons or debris to get in and muck up the internal workings. It moved as smooth and natural as his flesh hand and arm. That was a considerable improvement over the stiff, slow-moving joints in the other arm. There were even places for weapons to be stashed inside the arm. Excellent! Though he had a sneaking suspicion it'd be a while before he could convince the Avengers to arm him. Not that he blamed them. He had been sent to kill them, after all. They'd be the worst sorts of idiots imaginable if they trusted him with weapons this early on. Steve, who'd always been a light sleeper, unless he was sick, that he slept like the dead, woke with a shake of his head. He went very still when he realized Soldier was sitting up. Well, hello there. Good to see you awake. We were getting a little worried. You slept for 3 days straight, Steve said. Soldier had to fight past the fear and panic that wanted to keep him silent. This was too important. Steve. Maybe it was the way he said it. Maybe it was his expression. Soldier honestly didn't know, but Steve's expression went from wary and concerned to wide-eyed hope in 2 seconds flat. You remember? Steve asked. Soldier shrugged, unable to articulate it. The old injunctions against speaking were too strong, at least for now. He waggled his flesh hand, hoping Steve would understand. Steve cocked his head. Sort of, he guessed. Soldier nodded, then pointed at Steve and nodded emphatically. Steve started to tear up a little. You remember me, he said, his voice choked. Soldier nodded, then pointed at Steve before bringing his hand closer to the floor. Steve cocked his head for a second, then let out a wet laugh. You remember me being little. Soldier nodded again. Steve eyed him. So, talking is not a good thing, I take it? Soldier shook his head hard. Gotcha. You obviously don't have trouble communicating other ways. We could teach and learn sign language, so there's less guessing games going on, and I'm really, really glad you remember me. Really, Steve said. He still looked like he was on the verge of the sort of messy, crying Soldier only remembered having seen once or twice. Soldier did not like that at all. He liked it even less that he was the cause of those tears, even though he was aware it wasn't really his fault. No, it was their fault. Soldier was going to have fun making them pay for making Steve miserable.